Have you ever had a friend who you knew for a fact was way smarter than you, but somehow never lived up to it? Underachievement among gifted and talented students is rarely acknowledged compared to other diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. This has led to an unnecessary underperformance and loss of potential of these students. Gifted youth not only have to face everyday challenges felt by their peers in adolescence, but also feel the pressure to fit in without alienating themselves because of their talents. The goal for this presentation is to provide practical suggestions for teachers of gifted and talented youth in order to keep them motivated and focused. According to the Texas Education Agency, a gifted and talented student is defined as a child or youth who performs at or shows the potential to perform at a remarkably high level of accomplishment when compared to others of the same age, experience, or environment, and who meet the following three criteria. 1. Exhibits high performance capability in an intellectual, creative, or artistic area. 2. Possesses an unusual capacity for leadership. Or 3. Excels at a specific academic field. How do we face these needs, and what are they? Well, there are 5 basic categories. It is as follows: guidance needs, psychosocial needs, social and personal needs, cognitive needs, and physical needs. Without the correct level of challenges, interest dips, attention is lost, and the student is labeled as a poor student. Studies indicate that gifted and talented students need specialized guidance to deal with the mental problems associated with their talent, and they need to realize their own abilities independent of social pressure. Gifted and talented individuals tend to have a lower self-perception and self-assessment of themselves due to possible unintentional negative attitudes from their teachers and or peers. They do not fit in with the norm and are often ostracized because of it. This can lead to underperformance and disciplinary issues as they attempt to overcorrect just to fit in. The low attainment of gifted individuals leads to undesirable behavior, poor school habits, lack of mastery of skills, lack of focus, lack of discipline in school and at home. The guidance planning in this aspect is very important so that the talented student can understand aspects of their life to minimize outside noise and feel that they are contributing to something worth doing. More specifically on the psychological and emotional needs of G&T students, most parents and teachers find the need to incorporate these students with the understanding that everyone should be treated equal, when in fact it is very difficult to try and apply that to people who are gifted and talented. For a kid to think that they're different and that they need to somehow change to be able to fit in with everybody else, this seems to perpetuate a bad environment and also leads to things like depression and feeling of separation. Their inclusion into a classroom or society as a whole should not come at the cost of who they are. It is often difficult for teachers to connect with their gifted and talented students because these children tend to have specific sensory and motor needs. Gifted people have the depth of thinking that is reflected in problem solving and creative thinking, and might sometimes require different mediums to interpret and or explain their abstract thought processes. They themselves also need to be aware of this need and work on their development using techniques and strategies in creative thinking, problem solving, and self-expression. The social needs for gifted and talented students are often difficult to meet. They are usually very isolated, introverted types of people who find it difficult to communicate with a normal student. So finding like-minded peers who have maybe similar abilities or at least similar interests is very important. Another strategy might also be to be more realistic with the children, having them actually apply what the classroom is learning about in a real sense into the real world that is actually being discussed in society as a problem right now could be a way for them to stretch their imagination and work harder on what is being taught to the rest of the class. Most of these kids will feel the need to be challenged and to be pushed. Doing the status quo, just filling in blanks, it it doesn't stimulate any type of creativity or challenge. So it's important to provide those accordingly. The teacher should provide continuous encouragement for their ability to innovate, their ability to think beyond what is just on the paper. If they see how what they're learning at the moment might be applied in a different way, let them explore that. Keep pushing them, keep questioning them, and making them think so that they're not just sitting there. Allow them to create their own learning. It may not be exactly what you're teaching the rest of the class, but if it gets them thinking and gets them involved with the same concepts, but just on a different track, perhaps that is another way. Here is an example of how a school in Edgewood ISD has tackled the integration of gifted and talented students. The Gifted and Talented program on the elementary and intermediate campuses will have K through 5 students who meet all the identification criteria. They will pull these kids out of the classroom one day out of the week for only half of the day, but they will meet for specifically gifted and talented activities for math, science, language, and social studies. But they will be amongst their peers who are like minded in the way that they think and the way that they want to push and progress in their creativity. And it allows them to be themselves around other people who are like themselves. The middle school program is very similar to the elementary one, but instead of once a week, it'll be a single period that is met every single day. And these students, 6th through 8th grade, will be preparing for their Region 7 Model United Nations simulation, MUN, during the first semester. Gifted students will research the political, cultural, social, and economic issues for the countries that they're provided. So not only will they get a perspective of what is happening in their own country, but they have to start broadening their minds about other nations. And in high school, it'll be a little different. Each gifted and talented student will meet at the beginning of the semester with a designated teacher. Each one will have a designated teacher that will walk them through different opportunities that they could take. They can select competitions, activities, leadership positions, community service hours, in which they would like to be considered for during the following year or the upcoming year. They will also be entered into the Region 7 MUN, as well as robotics competitions, East Texas academic rodeo contests. Here are a few things the state of Texas has implemented in regards to gifted and talented students. As mentioned earlier, there are 3 criteria in identifying gifted and talented students. Using this criteria established by the State Board of Education, each school district shall adopt a process for identifying and serving gifted and talented students in the district and shall establish a program for each of these students at each grade level. The Teachers Education Association assists districts in providing comprehensive services to gifted learners in the following ways. They'll provide information on best practices, developments, and achievements. They'll help develop materials, facilitate partnerships among institutions of higher education and the communities to design comprehensive gifted and talented services. They'll collaborate with businesses and industry to provide additional opportunities for these gifted and talented students. And they'll monitor and implement any state or federal legislation designed to provide educational opportunities for gifted and talented students. It's also interesting to note that not more than 5% of a district's students in average daily attendance are eligible for funding under this section.
I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it's really tough if I see somebody not expressing their true potential. And here's a statistic that bothers me. By the time they reach high school, the top 5% of most intellectually gifted students we have, half of them are underachieving by the time they hit high school. And as if that isn't bad enough, 48% of those underachieving, very smart kids don't go ahead and graduate from college either. And if you follow them later, the myth of the late bloomer it's not borne out. In fact, what happens is underachievers at that very high level, when they get out and they're pursuing a career, by the time they're 35, they are as much as 13 years behind their peers in their career development. And it's because they bounce from one thing to another. I ran into this problem of underachievement. It didn't always obsess me like it does now, but I got a call from a mother, and she was anguished, and I could hear it in her voice. And she made an appointment for her family to come in. And her family consisted of her and her husband and their dear child, their 15-year-old child, making straight D's in his sophomore year in high school with an IQ of 150. And it was something about their agony at seeing this that really got to me. I worked with kids whose grades were poor before, and it didn't leave the kind of impression this did on me. And I listened to the parents talk, and what I heard them say repeatedly in the first 15 minutes was, please, son, why don't you just try? And then they turn to me and say, we don't understand. We ask him why he isn't doing better, and then we tell him, just try, just try. So I thought I heard something that was key. I asked the son to leave. I talked to him a little bit about whether he was willing to do well in school, and he said maybe. And so I talked to the parents, and I said, listen, I don't know whether you understand this or not, but here's what's going on. You are telling your child not to succeed. And they looked at me, and I continued. I said, when you say just try, you're actually saying don't succeed. You're saying just try. And kids are very literal, and they listen to what you say. And when they start testing limits, the way you respond to them tells them whether you're saying they have to or they don't have to. He felt he didn't have to do well in school. Lots of studies had been done. They gave kids study skills. They did all kinds of things. Well, I decided we had to go a different route. And so what I did, paying attention to the way parents were talking to their kids repeatedly, is I took the kids and I put them in a group for 14 weeks, and I talked to them not about school at all. We didn't mention school unless they brought it up. Instead, what I talked about was their aspirations and what they'd want to do if they really could. If they could run their own life, what would they want to do? What was their passion? What was the thing that if they did, it would be worth failing for? And I started telling the same thing to the parents, but in an entirely different environment. I told them they had to learn how to give clear directives to the kids and insist that the kids do well. I said, that's what they're asking for. And you know what? There's 50 years of research that shows unequivocally that what kids really thrive in, what makes them achieve, is when there are high demands, high expectations, firm guidance, really clear boundaries, and lots of affection, lots of warmth, and lots of engagement, and a willingness to listen. And this kind of devotion to saying, but this is the way it has to be. I will give you everything I have because you're too good to fail, and I'm not going to let you fail. I'm not going to let you. I demand that you do well, and you do well in a strong, solid way that's going to make you feel better. And you may not like this at first because it's a shock, like having to do things, but you've got to do it. And I already know that school is boring for you maybe, but while we all wait for the revolution in the paradigm in education, we can't stand by. Look, some things are hard in life. You know what happens when things are hard? You learn how to be tougher. You learn how to be resourceful. You learn how to overcome. And that's the message our children need from us. And when we give it to them, they respond. Guess what? Those kids, when there was research that showed nothing could improve them, in 14 weeks, these kids went up 6/10 of a grade point. That's the difference between a 3.2 and a 3.8. But you know what? I wasn't satisfied with that. 6 months later, I wanted to know what they were doing then. By then, you expect a regression back because we weren't coaching them. We didn't have any more contact with them. By then, it was 8/10 of a grade point. They had learned something that infected them and took them over, and their families too. And everybody said, you know what? I'm getting along with my kid better. I give you this charge. Go in, be brave, be strong with your children. They love it. It makes them feel strong. Even when they say, get out of my life, they love it when you give them structure. Go for it. Thank you.
Integration depends significantly on the preparedness of the teachers. We must develop background knowledge on the unique characteristics of each of our gifted learners, and a partnership needs to be developed between the student, ourselves, and the parents. There has to be communication on all fronts. We must demand preeminence from our students, but also give them control of their own learning. We can allow for differentiated learning, where the framework for the lesson can be for everyone, but should be malleable in how each individual student can practice and better understand the material. Never be afraid to be wrong yourself. We are their teachers. That is never a one-way street. I don't sit upon a throne. The demands are high, but we are in this together.